I'm very proud to be standing here and to present him with this medal. It's a special day for a very special person that he has shown himself to be, but special people are also surrounded by special people, and I hope that Jean herself, his wife, and his family also take pleasure in this award, which is an award not just for a single discovery, but for a lifetime's commitment to the work that has enabled so much benefit to be given to so many who should be grateful for the hard work and discoveries that you have put forward. So, Sir Peter, may I invite you to come forward to present you with this medal.
Well, the work started basically in 1972. I had the idea to convert what we were doing at the time on multiple pulse work in solids, to convert that into some effectively crude imaging system. And it really went from strength to strength until in the end we were able, in the apparatus that we had at the time, to get someone with a thin finger to pop it in the nuclear magnetic resonance coil, which was only 1.5 centimeters in diameter, but we were able to get images, proper images of their finger, cross-sectional images of their fingers, one at a time, of course.
Was that, how certain were you at that point that it would work?
Well, the imaging at small scale was working, and we went along with these images to a very important meeting at the MRC in London. They were considering how they could best support imaging at a number of universities. I'm talking now about 1975, 76. The original idea, of course, was made, as I said earlier, in about 1972, and so we were 2 or 3 years along the road, but we were the first to actually demonstrate that you could produce images of parts of the human anatomy, and this came as a big surprise, I think, for everyone at the MRC meeting, and they decided pretty well there and then that they would support us here at Nottingham.
So this was a phenomenal breakthrough for the team at Nottingham, was it then? Because others were working on similar systems.
Well, what happened is like many things. You have an idea, and before you can look around, others are following suit. And that's really what happened. We did the very first imaging in Britain, and more or less simultaneously to Paul Lauterbur in the United States. I didn't know about his work, and he didn't know about our plans, but I went to an important conference on nuclear magnetic resonance, and it was there in early 1973 that I discovered that Paul Lauterbur was doing similar work, and so from then on we were more or less working in parallel, although his approach was slightly different to ours.
So did you work together as a team, or were you...
No. His work was really based on an idea that was very much closely associated with X-ray scanning, and you know that Godfrey Hounsfield came up with the CT scanner, and Paul Lauterbur's idea was not unlike the way the CT scanner works, whereas our approach was completely different.
How did it differ? What was the difference?
Well, it's a mathematical difference. We were looking at the Fourier transform of an image, whereas Paul was looking directly at images. So if you look at the Fourier transform of something, it doesn't look like an ordinary image. is produced in what is called K-space, and then you, once you've got a K-space scan, you can then convert that into a proper image. But that's all done very quickly in a computer.
Did you at the time realise the significance of the work you were doing, that it would lead to the phenomenal revolution in medicine that it's led to today?
No, I think I would be, misleading you if I gave you that impression. We were very pleased to get an image, even of a finger or a wrist or any small object. There were many detractors, of course, in those early days, and when I went to the Medical Research Council to get the funding, I said that we wanted to build, we demonstrated finger images, and I wanted to build a whole body machine. And within, not at MRC, but within the nuclear magnetic resonance community, there was a sort of disbelief that one could take, that one could expand the imaging method from finger size to whole body size.
How did you go about doing that?
Well, we needed a magnet, so the first thing was to get Oxford Instruments to build a magnet. They hadn't built something that large before, but they managed to do this. It wasn't a superconductive magnet as we use today. It was an ordinary set of coils operating at room temperature. But having got the actual magnetic field from this magnet, we then just simply scaled up what we did at finger size up to whole body size. But as I say, there were a few detractors who thought it was going to be impossible, but it wasn't. We did it, and that's all history.
Did you have any doubts?
I didn't, because I'd done calculations which showed that you could do it, but others were just sort of thinking off the top of their head and thinking, you know, from finger size to whole body, no, impossible, can't do it. But you can.
And you were the first person to step inside the full body scanner, is that correct? And there were warnings at the time that of the potential dangers of doing that.
Well, we had just before I was going to a conference, and I was going with Peter Morris, who at that time was a postdoctoral fellow working with me. He'd actually qualified here and got his PhD in my group, but then he switched over to imaging, and he and I were going off to the States to give this presentation, and we wanted a whole body image to present at the meeting. And about a week before we were about to leave, I received this note from a Professor Tom Buddinger. He's in the University of California, a medical, well, I'm not sure, I think he's a medically qualified person, and he had done some calculations which, according to him, meant that I was putting myself into some considerable danger by getting into the magnetic field, and particularly from the gradients that we were using. So, but I'd done calculations which I personally believed, and I didn't really trust his calculation. And in fact, there was no problem at all. I think that he'd got his calculation wrong.
But there must have been concern amongst the team who were with you on that day. What did you say? Your wife was there, I get that.
Yes.
What did you say? Well, you know, because obviously you, in the back of your mind, you must have, you know, there were those warnings.
Well, I think, you know, what I said to, I mean, Peter Morris and another student of mine were operating the machine. I got in the magnet, which incidentally was completely enclosed in an aluminium box. box, so it was pitch black inside there. But what I said to them, because they could hear me speaking, although I couldn't see them, and we had no light inside either. There wasn't time, you know, we were in such a hurry. But anyway, I got in position inside the magnet, and I just simply said, put a single pulse in. And they pressed the button, and the single pulse came through. It made an audible click, so we knew it sort of caused the coils within the scanner to twitch, and that gave the noise. But I didn't feel anything apart from hearing the noise. So I said, proceed, no problem. So off we went. And that scan took about 50 minutes. And what I hadn't anticipated, because we'd never really used this magnet very much before, except for putting test tube phantoms in and so on. But to be in that magnet for 50 minutes, it got hotter and hotter. And the coils of the magnet, I was sort of squeezed between the coils, not along the axis of the magnet, but transverse. And the coils got hot to the touch. They were running at about 50 degrees or something like that. So I couldn't, my face was very, very close to the coils. I had two coils, one each side of me, and I couldn't move my head because it was so hot here and here. So I had to keep myself steady. And it got so hot in there because of this, the heat from the magnet. And I was literally dripping with perspiration when I got out. I hadn't anticipated getting quite so warm. And I think there was probably more danger there in overheating than in the electrics of the system.
These potential warnings, were they warnings that it could kill you or harm you? In what way could this machine?
Well, it could have electrocuted me. I mean, if you pass a current through the body with the electrodes touching, then it's obvious what happens. But in the case of induced currents, you don't actually touch the body, but you're causing fluctuations in the magnetic field outside the body, which cause currents to flow inside the body. And these currents can be dangerous to the point where you could end up causing cardiac fibrillation.
There are millions of people around the world who've got you to thank for the diagnosis that they have received through the MRI scanner.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I mean, the fact that that moment when you stepped out, you'd suddenly discovered it was a breakthrough in diagnostic medicine, which has saved countless lives.
Sure. But, well, I don't think one dwells upon these things. It's very nice. One has a warm feeling that, particularly when you meet people that have clearly had problems, and these have been successfully diagnosed by MRI, and they've received treatment and are now, fit and well. And I think for those people, one has a warm feeling, and we're very pleased that what we did has been able to help them. But of course, there are many others that for which the knowing what's wrong can be bad, not good. So it's
But it provides many answers.
Yes, I mean, it helps a lot of people, and there are a few, unfortunately, that when they learn the truth, it goes the other way, and it sort of hastens their demise. But generally speaking, I think there's a feeling, with me anyway, there's a feeling that we've done something that's helpful. And of course, it doesn't end there. We're still working on the scanner. We're still trying to improve things. One of the things that we're working on right now is the reduction of acoustic noise. That's a problem for many people, they get in the scanner and they don't really know what's coming until the machine starts, and then it sort of worries them very much because the noise level is so high. So we're trying to do something about reducing the noise. And of course this electric field effect that I mentioned before, the possibility that induced currents in the body would cause cardiac problems is another worry. Going back to an earlier comment that I made when I first got in the magnet, the calculations that Tom Buddinger had done weren't right. But if you do the calculations properly, and they've been done by us and by many other people since, there are electric currents flowing, and those currents depend on the magnetic field gradients that you're applying and how quickly they're switched on and off. So there is still a problem, and as you go to faster imaging methods, the problem increases. So if you want to do very rapid imaging as we do, the problem has to be solved. Otherwise you end up doing fast imaging on a corpse. So, you know, there is still a problem, and that's one of the things we're working on right now.
And you're working on that at a time when many people would have retired and be enjoying retirement. You're still coming in and working on that.
Yes. Yeah.
What drives you?
Well, there's a job to be done. Nobody else seems to be bothering with this problem, because I think, you know, one of the really one of the facts of imaging is that the companies tend to work with what they've got. You know, they can build machines, they can make a profit, and they're happy. But those people that are like myself, that are interested in pushing the method to the limit, as it were, we're worried about these effects which are still there, but at the moment are circumnavigated primarily because they slow the machine down. They operate the machine at such a speed that there is no danger. But if you want to do high-speed imaging, I mean, rather than have an image, rather than have a patient in the machine for half an hour, what I'm saying to you is that we can image in something like 50 milliseconds, which is a snap of, snap of a finger. That sort of speed. We can get a complete image in that time. But there are these worries about electrocuting the patient. So you've got to, if you want to do high-speed imaging, you've got to solve that problem.
And I know because you're concerned as well about children. This is one area that you're concerned about, isn't
Sure.
it? Just explain your concerns there.
Well, we want, with the acoustic side of it, we want to get the imaging over and done with quickly, because young children or infirm patients can't stand the claustrophobia, or they can't keep still. And one of the problems, of course, if you move while you're being imaged by a few millimeters or so, you end up blurring the image, and then you have to go and have another image. And with anyone that's at all nervous, they won't want this. So the idea is to get the image over and done with as quickly as possible and at the highest quality. And one way to do this and to stop image blurring is to do it very rapidly.
So will you carry on working until you've solved that problem?
Well, it depends, I think, on health, my own health, but it also depends, I think, on money, because at the moment we're funding our own research. We get no support from outside at all. So I'm actually paying for this research at the moment.